The film wastes no time announcing its true obsession. Not romance, not mystery, but the slow construction of a psychological powder keg. It opens in 2000 with a prosecutor prodding an aged David Marks about his past, and the script immediately weaponizes his childhood trauma as Exhibit A. David admits that his mother died violently when he was 7 and that he watched it happen, a choice that frames him less as a wholesome protagonist and more as a long-running experiment in unresolved grief. A title card insists the story is inspired by real events between 1971 and 2003, which is the movie's polite way of saying, yes, this is that case you half remember from true crime documentaries. From there, a montage of David's happy childhood moments with his mother feels almost aggressively nostalgic, a sentimental buffer before the film dives into New York City in 1971. The script drops us into David's life as he's dressed for a party, only to be yanked away by his father Sanford's demand that he fix a plumbing problem in one of their rental units. The detour is not about plumbing. It's the movie's first clear statement of control as inheritance, showing how Sanford rewrites his son's life on a whim. At the apartment, David meets Katie, the beautiful tenant whose presence instantly short-circuits his sense of duty. He fails at the plumbing, apologizes, and invites her to the party instead, because apparently the best way to fix a leak is to ignore it and flirt. At the party, Sanford greets his son with casual humiliation, scolding him for being late and looking down on Katie as too simple for their world. The camera's focus on senators and the mayor orbiting Sanford makes it obvious. This man doesn't own property. He owns the illusion of social superiority. David, meanwhile, whispers to Katie that he has no interest in the family empire and dreams of opening a health food store. Katie reveals her own derailed ambitions in medicine after her father's death, tying both characters together through the shared wound of lost futures. This early section is a classic example of how the film sets up a love versus legacy conflict, only to slowly tip the scales toward legacy winning by suffocation. The lighting and production design in these initial New York sequences lean into glossy wealth and emotional coldness, creating a clear visual gap between Sanford's polished world and Katie's warmth. The contrast makes every small moment of affection between David and Katie feel like a rebellion staged in someone else's mansion. The story quickly fast-forwards to the couple moving to Vermont and opening their idealistic little health food store. All good things. The name is so on the nose it might as well come with a spoiler. The film is already promising that nothing good here will last. Sanford shows up to inspect his son's rural experiment and, with surgical cruelty, tells David that Katie is a beautiful woman who doesn't deserve to live like this. In one line, the script fuses class snobbery with emotional manipulation, convincing David that his attempt at an honest life is actually a form of neglect. The supposedly loving father is written like a corporate rebranding of emotional abuse. When David visits Katie's family, the film briefly flirts with the idea of normalcy. Their simple, affectionate behavior leaves him disarmed, because he's never seen warmth that wasn't transactional. He struggles to articulate what he feels, labeling them as just different, and blurts out a marriage proposal that feels impulsive but thematically consistent. He's trying to grab onto the only version of life that doesn't look like Sanford's. The wedding comes with a wonderfully petty touch. Sanford, the richest man at the table, makes Katie's mother pay for lunch, underlining how the movie uses small economic humiliations to show a rigid class divide posing as family tradition. Visually, the Vermont sequences soften the color palette and open up the framing, selling the illusion of freedom. Yet the camera never lets us forget Sanford's looming influence, treating him like a gravitational pull that the couple can't escape. It's an effective contrast that sets up Vermont not as salvation but as a brief, doomed intermission. Eventually, under Sanford's pressure, David sells the shabby Vermont dream and drags Katie back to New York, where he joins the family business. The job is as grimy as his father is polished. Bookkeeping and rent collection from properties that turn out to be porn theaters, peep shows, and brothels. This is the script at its most literal. The respectable real estate empire is quietly funded by moral decay. It's not subtle, but it does sharpen the idea that the Marx fortune is built on both public respectability and private rot. To compensate for returning to the fold, David buys Katie a luxurious apartment. The film uses the space like a visual joke. The bigger the home, the smaller Katie's autonomy. When she suggests having a child, David shuts down the conversation so hard the scene almost freezes. He claims something is wrong, refuses to elaborate, and leaves her to assume he might be infertile. Instead of clarifying, the script has him retreat into sullen silence, which is less medical issue and more emotional brick wall. Here, the pacing becomes intentionally suffocating. Scenes linger on awkward silences and half-finished conversations, mirroring the way unresolved trauma just hovers in the room. It's not always subtle, but the deliberate drag works to make the audience feel the same claustrophobic stagnation Katie does. At a party, David reconnects with his childhood friend Deborah, whose presence signals a different version of David, looser, more himself, at least on the surface. While David socializes, Deborah casually drops the bomb on Katie, David's mother jumped from a roof, cracked her skull, and he hid under a table for a week before re-emerging as if nothing had happened. It's a chilling anecdote that reframes his earlier behavior as the coping mechanism of a man who learned to treat catastrophe as something to bury, not process. The film, to its credit, uses this backstory not just for shock value but to explain his obsession with emotional control. The way this traumatic reveal is handled is one of the movie's sharper choices. Rather than giving David a tearful confession scene, it outsources his history to a third party, emphasizing how little of his inner life he's willing to share with Katie. It's a smart, if cruel, narrative move that strengthens the central theme of emotional opacity. Months later, the couple buys a lake house in Westchester, a setting the film uses as both a vacation dream and a future crime scene. The housewarming party is standard domestic bliss camouflage, but once everyone leaves, Katie announces she's pregnant. David's reaction is so violently negative that it borders on self-parody. He rages, throws things, and insists he'll do anything for her except this. The script is crystal clear. The idea of becoming a father threatens to crack the brittle shell he's constructed around his childhood trauma. When Katie assures him their child won't endure what he did, he only grows more unhinged, because the film is less interested in healing and more in showing how trauma replicates itself when left untreated. The next morning, Katie heads to a clinic for an abortion, her face a mix of fear and resignation. On the way, David spots police raiding one of the brothels their family rents to and immediately calls Sanford. In a perfect encapsulation of the family's ethics, Sanford orders him to ignore his wife's procedure and collect rent from another building before the cops arrive. David complies, sending Katie alone to the clinic. It's a brutal story choice that turns the abortion not just into a personal tragedy, but into an indictment of a family that always chooses profit over people. Emotionally, this stretch of the film leans heavily on Kirsten Dunst's performance. The direction often holds on her after conversations end, letting us see the incremental erosion of her agency as money, marriage, and manipulation close in. Even when the script tips toward melodrama, the camera's loyalty to her point of view keeps the story grounded. After the procedure, David picks Katie up and takes her to a friend's place, as if a bit of socializing will smooth over the emotional crater. In the bathroom, Lauren, the friend's wife, tries to console Katie and offers her drugs, which Katie accepts. It's the movie nudging her further down the path of numbing herself, because honest conversation has completely failed her. Later, a mysterious blonde woman parks by a bridge and dumps a heavy black bag into the river, strongly hinting at a body. The script doesn't spell it out yet, but it's already toying with the idea that in this world, inconvenient lives don't end. They are disposed of. In the aftermath, Katie moves into the lake house and prepares for medical school while David stays in New York, turning their marriage into a weekend-only arrangement. The distance doesn't create longing. It just exposes the cracks. When David discovers a letter confirming Katie's acceptance into medical college, he reacts with anger, not pride, and literally swims away from the problem. Because why process your feelings when you can sprint into a lake instead? At a family celebration for her acceptance, Katie glows with happiness, but David broods on the sidelines. He demands they leave early, and when she doesn't immediately obey, he storms back inside and drags her out in front of everyone, turning private control into public spectacle. These scenes are edited to feel increasingly jagged, cutting between celebration and confrontation in a way that highlights the widening gap between how Katie's family sees her future and how David intends to limit it. The film uses this dissonance effectively to make every party feel like the calm before an inevitable storm. The next morning, Katie packs her things and announces she wants a divorce. David doesn't plead, he threatens. He warns her that if she leaves, he won't be able to support her lifestyle. It's less a confession and more a reminder that her financial stability is another leash he holds. Realizing she has no economic ground to stand on, she stays, and the movie quietly underlines how money becomes a weapon in abusive relationships. Over lunch with Lauren, Katie vents about her problems, only to have her credit card declined in front of the waitress. Lauren steps in to pay, but the humiliation is the point. Off-screen, David has begun tightening the financial noose. Later, a lawyer explains that David is the beneficiary of family trusts, and Katie can access money only as long as she stays married. If she divorces him, she gets nothing because David technically owns nothing personally. The lawyer notes that wealthy families often structure their affairs this way to shield themselves in divorce, turning what looks like marital support into a cleverly disguised trap. Here, the script edges into social commentary, exposing how legal and financial systems can quietly side with the powerful. It's one of the film's sharper insights, showing that abuse isn't only emotional or physical. It's also embedded in the paperwork. Armed with this grim knowledge, Katie starts looking for leverage. She sneaks into David's office, her bruised face hinting at another violent confrontation the night before, and finds an account book documenting payments tied to illegal brothels. She steals it and mails it to the authorities, finally fighting back with documentation instead of pleas. Meanwhile, the film returns to the image of the blonde woman at the bridge, this time throwing another bag into the river, complete with a glimpse of a saw. Subtle, this movie is not, but it does understand how to turn a bridge into a recurring symbol of secrets literally being dumped out of sight. When officials receive the account book, it exposes the Marks family's sleazy business dealings, but their power ensures no real consequences. The documents are quietly returned to Sanford, and David is berated by his younger brother and his father for incompetence and for failing to control his wife. Sanford removes him from the business and hands control to the younger son, once again framing David as the weak link in a dynasty that values obedience over ethics. The sound design during these confrontations is particularly effective. Doors closing, raised voices, and small ambient noises all build a sense of a man being shut out of the empire he never truly wanted, yet is still chained to. It's a rare moment where the technical craft and thematic content align neatly. On the other side of this implosion, Katie retreats to her parents' home, confesses her guilt over the abortion, and spirals. She drinks heavily and calls David, saying she can't take it anymore and wants to leave. He responds with soothing promises and declarations of love, inviting her back with the same voice he's used to lure her into every bad decision so far. After hanging up, he looks at his dog Ivan and asks what the dog is staring at. A small, almost darkly comedic beat that hints at his fractured sense of normalcy. Katie, drunk and ignoring her family's warnings, drives home to David. He greets her with ordinary questions about whether she's eaten, a domestic calm that feels more sinister than any overt threat. When she asks about Ivan, David casually says he locked the dog in the kennel because it bit him. Over dinner, he comments that she would have made a good mother, a line so cruelly ironic it lands like a confession disguised as a compliment. Taking out the trash, Katie finds Ivan's bloody scarf outside and brings it inside, devastated. David remains eerily calm, refusing to explain. Shortly after, a neighbor hears loud banging from their house, but sees nothing when she looks outside. The film wisely leaves this moment ambiguous. The violence is heard, not seen, putting the audience in the neighbor's shoes, aware something is wrong, unable to prove it. The decision to imply rather than show Katie's fate is one of the movie's more restrained choices. By withholding the actual moment of violence, it keeps the focus on the patterns of control, guilt, and denial rather than turning the climax into spectacle. Later that night, David appears at Sanford's mansion, claiming his mother must have hated him. Sanford counters that she was mentally ill and that he did everything for her, just as he did for David. David snaps, accusing his father of making him witness his mother's death, while Sanford insists he hoped David's presence would change her mind at the last moment. The conversation is less about truth and more about two men fighting over who gets to own the narrative of their shared trauma. David then remarks that Katie is gone and that he's now just like his father, a chilling admission that the cycle is complete. These father-son scenes are lit colder and framed tighter, emphasizing the idea that both men are trapped in the same emotional architecture. It's not subtle, but it drives home how intergenerational damage is treated as destiny in this story. The film jumps back to the present-day courtroom, where older David addresses the jury. He claims that he and Katie went to the lake house, after which he put her on a train to the city, never seeing her again. The prosecutor counters with witness testimony that Katie was seen at their apartment later that night and the next morning making a phone call and getting into a taxi. David blandly confirms these details while denying any role in her disappearance, which the narrative dates to 1982 and labels as still unresolved. A flashback reveals that 18 years later, a public prosecutor reopens the case, naming David as the main suspect. David reacts by fleeing to Texas and reinventing himself as a woman, a twist that the film plays both as disguise and as another layer of identity disintegration. When an elderly neighbor, Marvin, complains about noise, David pretends to be mute to avoid confrontation, because nothing says emotional maturity like dodging both police and basic neighborly conversation. In Texas, David's life plays out like a grim parody of anonymity. He watches news coverage about Katie's reopened case and learns that the district attorney was inspired by an unpublished novel written by Deborah, which contains a murder eerily similar to Katie's disappearance. He also finds out that investigators searched the lake house and discovered nothing but the dog's remains. Yet another small cruelty buried under years of silence. Deborah leaves voicemails begging for help and money, but David ignores them, proving that his talent for emotional avoidance survived the move. The way the film intercuts news reports, voicemails, and David's quiet reactions creates an eerie sense that he's watching his own myth being constructed in real time, unable or unwilling to intervene. It's one of the more effective uses of media within the story, showing how real-life horrors get repackaged as narrative fodder. Over time, David and Marvin grow closer. Marvin discovers that David is not actually mute and is cross-dressing, but shrugs it off as just another eccentricity, especially once he realizes David is wealthy. They start house hunting together, planning to live as unlikely companions. Meanwhile, Deborah's voicemails grow more desperate. When David still doesn't respond, she threatens to talk to the cops. Eventually, she arrives home to find a car outside and assumes it's David. Instead, it's Marvin, who promptly shoots her. He later calls David from a motel, bragging that he has taken care of everything. But David doesn't pick up, proving that outsourcing your problems to desperate neighbors is as bad an idea as it sounds. When Marvin can't reach David and finds himself evicted and broke, the film reveals the deal between them. Marvin expected a payoff that never came. One evening, David returns home to find Marvin inside watching TV. Marvin accuses him of betrayal and tries to shoot him, but David overpowers him, beats him with a telephone, and finishes him off with a gun. It's a grimly ironic scene where the man who's always avoided confrontation finally engages, and the result is murder. Back in court, David claims he killed Marvin in self-defense, spinning a story about an evicted neighbor demanding to move in and reacting violently when refused. He admits he disposed of the body because he believed no one would believe him. A flashback shows him dumping the corpse off a bridge while dressed as the familiar blonde woman, cementing the implication that this isn't his first time using that persona to erase inconvenient people. The editing around these revelations leans heavily on cross-cutting between testimony and flashback, inviting the audience to weigh David's words against what they've seen. It's a classic crime drama technique, but here it underscores the movie's fixation on how easily narratives can be shaped to fit whatever version of the truth is most convenient. The prosecutor presses further, asking whether David killed Deborah or if her death is connected to Katie's disappearance. He denies both. The film answers not with direct confession but with another flashback. The doorman who claimed to see Katie after her disappearance actually saw Deborah in a blonde wig, wearing Katie's clothes and making that phone call before leaving in a taxi. The night David confronted his father outside the car, Sanford opened the trunk and saw something horrifying, presumably Katie's remains, though the film pointedly refuses to show it. In the end, the jury believes David's self-defense story regarding Marvin and finds him not guilty of murder, but punishes him with 9 months in jail for improperly disposing of the body. No one is ever charged with Deborah's death. Katie's disappearance remains officially unsolved, even as the film has practically underlined the answer in red. David goes on to become a successful real estate investor, the embodiment of a system where wealth, ambiguity, and charm are often enough to outlast truth. As a whole, the movie operates less as a whodunit and more as a study of how money and trauma can warp accountability. Its greatest strength lies in the way it frames each domestic moment, a dinner, a party, a quiet drive, as a step in a long-term campaign of control. Its greatest weakness is that, like David himself, it sometimes hides behind style when it's inches away from confronting something truly devastating head-on.